Well, thank you all for being here. Can you guys hear me in the back? All right, great. We actually, we're overwhelmed that this many people came, and if you don't mind, Will and I would actually like to take a picture. Our mothers would not believe that this many people came out to hear us speak, so please wave to the camera. We'd Skype them if they knew how to use it, so anyway. Before we begin, I really would just like to take a poll. How many college students, current college students do we have here? Wow, great. How many student teachers, currently student teaching? And then like beginning teachers, 1 to 3 years, awesome. And then we'll just assume the rest of you are friends, colleagues, or people we have hired to be here to laugh at all of our jokes. So, wonderful. Like she said, my name is Stephen Meyer, and I just want to kind of she gave a brief overview of where we've been, but I kind of want to talk about where we came from and how this clinic developed. I grew up in Ohio, what you Texans refer to as a Yankee, and so I grew up in Ohio. I went to Indiana University, and I was very, very, very fortunate that my first job was at Harrison High School in Cobb County. My very first semester of teaching at that time was in 2007, and Harrison was going to Grand Nationals for the first time, where we ended up making finals, and also the wind ensemble was performing at Midwest. So that was my very first experience teaching, and it was overwhelming. And I know that's very, very, very rare. I was extremely fortunate to get that position, but it was a great lesson because with that amount of pressure and expectation, there was no room to make mistakes. And that if I did make mistakes, I had to figure it out very, very quickly. And a lot of these lessons that we're going to share with you today came about during those first couple years. And then again, when I transitioned to Clear Creek High School to be the head director, that was just a whole nother different world. Yes, sir.
Welcome. Yes, and I also started in Georgia. I actually grew up in Georgia, went to college in Atlanta. And this stupid thing keeps popping in. Try that. The job situation in Georgia was pretty grim for band directors and things like that, and the position that I had kind of expected to get into or that I'd been working towards was actually cut, and so I was lucky enough to get a position at Duncanville High School. I started out as their marching band arranger and then was just kind of there at the right time when Dr. Tom Schein retired, who has a clinic next door right after this that you will all go to. But came into a similar situation where I felt very overwhelmed by what the other people in the room knew, and had to have a very quick transition into acting like I also knew the same amount of information. So a lot of these lessons that developed sort of were put together, and Steve did a clinic with the same title at Midwest a couple years ago, and then I did a similar clinic to this at TBA this past summer, and so we thought we'd kind of merge the two together from our perspectives that have happened here.
So the way that this title came about is my very first semester teaching at Harrison. We had a box truck there that the band used every week. And one day, David Vandewalker, who was the director of bands there, came into my office and said, "Okay, now Steve, go ahead and turn the truck around and so we can load all the percussion equipment for the football game." And I looked at it and I said, "What?" And at that point, I had never driven a U-Haul. I don't know how. Every time I moved, I just had all my stuff in a van, and I never had driven a truck before at that point. So I said, "Okay," being the willing, energetic young teacher, ready to do anything, and. Needless to say, there is now a stop sign at Harrison High School that is completely bent over, and I just, out of my blind side, just totally backed up into it. And I went back into David's office and I dropped the keys on his desk and I said, "Well, that wasn't in the book." And it kind of just became a running joke, and we just kept a list over the course of the year of all of the things that are completely not related to music that have to do with music education. And that's really what our clinic is for today. We're not going to tell you how to make your band sound better or the new technology apps, because there are way more people who have far more experience in that field that you should go seek out, and that's why we're here too. But what we do want to do is give you a glimpse of all of our experiences and our lessons in hopes that many of you beginning teachers don't make the same mistakes as we did, and kind of prepare you for that, because it can be very overwhelming, and that is one of the biggest signs of burnout that we see as young teachers, is that the musical side is not fulfilling enough to match the non-musical side. And so we really hope that by giving you these lessons, you kind of learn that this is a part of the job. And unfortunately, it's a big part of the job. So what exactly are we talking about? Your job responsibilities. When I first started teaching, I was like, oh, actually before we do that, we do want to give a little disclaimer in that this is completely not to discredit any of the university education programs. Both Will and I really feel like the education programs that our alma maters did such a great job at preparing us for the music part and the teaching part. And there really is just not enough time in a university education program to teach you all of this stuff. So we really want to throw that out there and really make sure that we are very grateful to those people who taught us the musical parts of our job. Again, in hopes that we can kind of steer you away from the other things. So the job responsibilities, when you sign up for your first job, you think that it's going to be music, I'm going to have my band, I'm going to make my band awesome, we're going to be honor band this year, and then you get to the first day of your job and you realize over the course that there are many things besides being a musician and a teacher. You're also a financial accountant. This is just a small list of what we put together. You're a psychologist, you're dealing with teenage emotions, which we're going to get into. You're a sociologist, you're a secretary, you're a lawyer sometimes. You're a marketing director for your program, you're the publicity manager, you're the construction engineer, if you have props or flags or all of that stuff, sets for choir. Everything that you do, if you have an elementary classroom, you're building walls and cutting out shape, all of that stuff. You're a truck driver, you're a bus driver, you're a janitor. If you have something going on, you're cleaning up afterwards and making sure that everything is neat and orderly at the end of the day. You're a philanthropist, you're an event planner, costume designer, therapist, well, probably more so a therapist than anything else, and a private lesson instructor sometimes. So all of those things that you see in the yellow are all of the other duties as assigned. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about in dealing with all of these different issues.
And we could probably list a million more, and you're probably thinking of a million more in your brain, but the concept is that just what we were talking about, not only can university music ed programs not necessarily prepare you for this specifically, but it all depends so much on your specific situation. So we kind of reference that to talking about your teaching bubble and what that's like for you to be in a situation where you kind of have to understand what your world is like. And so for me, when I left Georgia, the school where I was working for about 2 or 3 years in Georgia, kind of as a marching staff member and student teacher, was very wealthy area, very upper middle class. There was a pretty solid line of what the majority in terms of racial status and everything like that was in this school. And then when I came to Duncanville, it was very different, and I didn't necessarily know that when I first got to Duncanville. I didn't know the difference in socioeconomic status or in racial percentages or anything like that. And in many cases, when I first got there, I made some assumptions about what that would mean for me as a teacher. And that's what I quickly had to correct myself about that, to assume that those situations would give me any less special of a group of kids to work with, or would give me any less qualified or capable a group of kids to work with. But what it did have to make me realize as I was working with these students is there are so many things that we have to think about. There are days that I can't have sectionals with this group of kids because one of them has to go home and cook for his brothers and sisters because they don't have a parent at home. Or there are days that these kids have to work on these days, so we have to work on that because they have to help provide for their family. And I didn't have to deal with those things in Georgia, and I say deal with like it's a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing. These kids, in a lot of cases, are getting so many life experiences at a much earlier age than I ever had to, and it really shapes their character and helps shape me as a teacher to know what that feels like.
Yeah, and same for me too. I remember learning, when you go into a job interview, you really want to study the program, you want to study the area, you want to study the school, so that when you go into the interview, you're knowledgeable about all those things. And when I first got to Harrison, I looked it up, I did all my research, I knew all about it, but that's very different than the reality of where you're actually living and where those kids come from and come to your school. I didn't realize what a difference it would be moving from the north in Indiana, Ohio, to the south. And one of my most embarrassing stories about that is when, for one thing, we didn't have youth group or we didn't have all of that, but I realized how big church is in the south. And that was not the case in the north, and that I was shocked that on Wednesday nights you couldn't do anything because that was youth group night. And again, that was just a new concept for me that was like, oh, wow. And then the other light bulb moment, I guess, was when we were at our very first football game. We had to travel like 4 hours south to nowhere, Georgia, to play this really great team where football was the big thing to do. And we actually ended up winning, and there was a stand tune that the band played called Mortal Kombat, and it was just loud, and it was da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and the kids loved it and played it as loud as possible. So the game finished, we won, and all the kids were like, Mr. Meyer, let's play Mortal Kombat. And I'm like, sure, go! And so the kids, we counted it off, and they were just playing away, and all of a sudden the parents are like, no, no! And the football teams are looking back, and my back's faced to the football field, and I look out onto the field, and the teams are praying with each other. And I looked to the other director, I said, what? They pray? They're pounding each other's butts for 4 quarters, and then at the end they hold hands and pray, and it was just, my mind was blown. I couldn't believe that. We didn't do that in Ohio State land, where I came from, and so it was just one of those culture shock moments. We can laugh at it now, but it was extremely embarrassing at that point. And so really learning your culture, learning where the kids come from is a really important thing to do. And Will's going to talk about how this really goes into affecting your teaching style on an everyday basis.
Well, and that was something I learned quickly, and I know we both have examples of this, that there were certain ways I could communicate with my students in Georgia that they didn't necessarily grasp negativity as well as sometimes I would hope, or sometimes as angry as I was that I wanted to deliver and I couldn't. And so sometimes I had to, Mr. Rogers said a little bit when I'm giving them feedback, to find ways to, make apparent how I really feel inside without saying non-Disney words at school. And but then when I get into a new situation, and this could be different everywhere I go, but I quickly found out that I could be a little rougher with some of the kids verbally in terms of what I say to them and how I correct them. And I'm kind of a smart aleck in general, and so being able, all my friends just nodded. So I found out that I could have more of that kind of relationship, being funny with students, and they could dish it right back to me. And again, it's dependent on every environment. And you know what your situation is like, what you can get away with, not just based on your kids, but also your parents, your fellow teachers, your administrators, all that kind of stuff. So sometimes the communication aspect with how you teach really is so dependent on the bubble that you live in.
And I think it's the same way when I was at Harrison. It was a upper middle class environment, and there was a lot of stay-at-home moms, one working parent, and so that really affects the way that the kids at Harrison they needed a lot more nurturing, and they like Will said, they didn't respond well to negativity or being told that they were wrong. And in what we do, we tell them they're wrong every single minute of rehearsal. And for me, in rehearsal, my teaching pace was very quick. I kind of was like, okay, I got 45 minutes, I'm going to try and make this music the best that I can. And I would just go when I first started teaching. And it was boom, 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 you're not doing this right, you're not doing this right, you're not. And what I noticed was after about 20 minutes, the kids would just shut down. Or if you called that kid out and said, hey, you're playing this wrong, there was just total embarrassment. And what I kind of came to learn with the head director kind of pulled me aside and said, Steve, you can't be doing this. You're not going to get those kids on your side if you constantly are doing that. I would always, and then so I had to learn, my teaching style had to change to make sure and force myself, even if I had to make it up, to focus on the positive and give them positive compliments and kind of what we kind of coined the term, the Mr. Rogers approach to it. So again, that took a little while of understanding the kids, and a lot of it has to relate to how they're raised at home, what goes on at home, and what they're used to. Now, when I came to Clear Creek, it was a very different. We still had some of those environments, but we also had many families that had 2 working parents, and a lot of those families were just extremely grateful that their kid had a place to go. They didn't, and those kids were used to, like Will said, being a little rougher, because maybe that's how they were at home, or that's how they were treated at home, and so they didn't respond as negatively to some of that teaching style that I had as the kids did at Harrison. So it was really trying to find that line of, this is where I get through best to my students in the short amount of time that we have. So again,
it's also about knowing your students as well, that within that bubble, there are groups of students that you can communicate with in a certain way. I know some of the football players in my band, I know that I can communicate with them and threaten to tell their coach when they're not doing something they need to do, and suddenly they're the best kids ever. And then there are certain other personalities. So you have the macro vision of, or the large vision of your bubble, and then each little micro group within that you you have to really understand. And so knowing not only the big picture, but the little picture. But the biggest trouble is that no matter what you do, we are constantly dealing with teenagers, which is the biggest trouble in all of
So, dramatic, emotional, hormonal teenagers. And for those, we're talking about teenagers. We know that there are many choir and elementary and all of that, whatever you go into. And this has just been our experience with teenagers. Anything that we kind of learn, you can kind of take from that.
Yeah, and the biggest difference that I had to go through is, the same thing we've talked about. Is that you go in expecting to be able to, just put this wisdom out in the world, and they're going to grab hold of it, and you're going to make great music every day. And then you walk in the first day, and one's crying, one has their instrument in pieces because another one threw it across the room, and you have all these things happening. And the first couple of days, you're not doing anything but making sure that their instruments are in one piece and that somebody's not trying to kill somebody else in the same room. But the biggest problem is that there's a lack of a generation gap for us in a lot of cases when we start teaching, especially when we're student teaching or observing or working with a marching band as a college student. And when I first started teaching in Georgia, I had students that were older than my little brother, so the distance in age was nothing significant there, and I had students who had siblings that were older than me, and I still have that now in Duncanville. I have students who have older brothers and sisters who are way older than me, and so you kind of have to establish what your expectation is for how not only you communicate with students, but how they communicate with you. And I think there's plenty of ways we can use this to our advantage. There are plenty of situations where they think they can say something that is topical for their generation that they think no one will get in the band office, but I always know. And and can catch them in that. And a lot of times it's easy for us to be able to relate to these students because they feel like we have a closer relationship to them. Now the other side to it, the double-edged sword of it, is that there are many cases where they may want to take advantage of that lack of age difference with you and the way they communicate with you. And I was just telling Steve yesterday, I had a small meltdown in class the other day when a student walked in about 10 minutes late, who's always late, and his reaction to me saying, "Danny, please hurry," was that. And so I didn't handle that very well, but we can get to that later. But I don't think he would have communicated that way to another band director because he didn't see me necessarily as a much older, superior figure. He saw me as somebody who's just a little bit older than him who he doesn't really like. So it happens.
And the other thing is that the other flip side is those kids place a lot of trust in you. They see that you're young, you're energetic, and so some kids place a little more trust than that's necessary. One time I had this really great student. She was a freshman when I first started at Harrison. She had Asperger's syndrome, and she really had a hard time relating with people, and over the course of a couple of years, her and I really could just connect with her, and I could just help her out in the way and just sit down and listen and kind of work through some of those emotional things. Well, one day she was crying in band class, hysterically crying. So I pulled her out, I kind of pulled her into the office, we had a couch in there, I said, "Leslie, what's wrong?" And she goes, "I just found out that my dad is cheating on my mom with his secretary, and I caught them last night, and I'm the only one that knows, and I'm not allowed to tell anybody." And I'm like, oh my God. This was not in the Casca pain theory test. And it just spews out, and this is not, it's not part of our job, it's for the counselors. They're okay, go to the counselor. I hate them, I can't talk to them, they're mean. Okay, you're just going through your checklist. So that was one of those moments I shouldn't know this, what do I do? And they feel comfortable with you that sometimes they do cross that line. And this kind of goes into the real educational psychology course. Raise your hand if you've taken educational psychology. Good, and keep your hand raised if you remember anything from educational psychology. Very good, excellent, okay. I think really all it goes back to, especially if you're dealing with teenagers, is the emotions and the drama. And that what we as band directors or as musicians and as music educators do is that these kids go through so much in their day, and then we expect them to sit down, after the bell rings, get their instrument, sit down and play beautiful music, just like that. But meanwhile, sometimes what it took me a long time to understand is that the kid comes to you and they've already had a math test. They're stressed about an exam. They're stressed about what's going on at home. A boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with them. Something said about them on Facebook about their chair partner or chair stand. There is so many things that they bring into this rehearsal that prevent you from accomplishing that goal. And you know, as music educators, we prepare all day for those rehearsals. I think about it constantly, okay, this is what I want to get accomplished. And then it just, from left field, something happens. And that really took me a long time to get over and be patient with and try to understand from the student's point of view. I would react instantly if a kid was not on it and ready to go. And if they were kind of distraught, I immediately thought they were not engaged and not willing to pay attention. But over time, it took me a lot of patience to realize, okay, what's going on with this kid? And ask that question first. And sometimes it's the latter, where the kid is just, woo, all the way, you know, whatever's going on. But most of the time, there's something going on, because we really have the greatest kids. We teach the best kids and the smartest kids in the school. And they want to be there. We wouldn't have jobs if they didn't want to be there. And that kind of, when I learned that, it really helped me to develop that connection and that understanding of what the kids are going through and what they bring into the rehearsal before we get started and force them to make great music all the time and not make any mistakes.
And the drama plays into an administrative side of what you're doing too. You know, I've just sent in our room list, our final room list for our Disney trip over spring break, and I realized after I sent it that I had accidentally put 2 girls in the same room that I knew hated each other. And if that happened, then I would spend most of Disney at a prison or at a hospital. And I didn't that was the way I wanted to be in the happiest place on earth. So having to adjust rooms and ask, would you mind if this person is in the same room as you, and switching things like that, and I kind of sat back thinking, I can't believe this is what I'm having to think about. And you know, again, this wasn't in my Bloom's taxonomy of how to deal with teenage drama. But the point is that I had to think about those things all the time, and I have to think about them with seating arrangements. You know, I have 2 kids, the top 2 kids, well, maybe second and third in my trumpet section, that I know cannot sit next to each other. And so no matter if they both come in and play the Hummel concerto perfectly, one's going to sit there and one's going to sit there. And that's the only way they can sit. And so it's just a matter of who's going to be in the high chair, who's going to be in the low chair in the section. Because you know that's the only way I know they'll be able to actually get something done during class. And so when you have to think about how the drama changes your ability to just talk about music, you know, I think it's comforting when you can just think, okay, this is going to happen. Somebody is going to come in today and freak out about something that has nothing to do with band. And as soon as I was able to say that to myself before classes started, then when it happened, I was able to react to it a lot better than the kids were when it first happened to them.
Yeah. And so the last thing that we kind of want to talk about, the thing that I was not prepared for, was creating leaders in your group and creating human beings, young adults, that will be able to lead your program and have all the skills necessary in music, but all the life skills that we also teach them. And raise your hand if you were a part of a leadership program in high school before you started teaching. That's awesome. I never had that experience. And so for me, when I first got to Harrison, all of that was in place and I was learning with them. But then when I transitioned over to Clear Creek and I was the one that was in charge, it was a pretty overwhelming feeling to know that I was the mentor for these kids, I was in charge of how they felt, and that some people actually aspired to be like me. And that thought really made me grow up really fast. And one of the hardest things is that as a 22, 23-year-old just starting to teach, I could not act like a 22, 23-year-old that all my friends were doing, what they were doing or how they were acting. And I kept telling my parents, you know, I feel like I'm like 34 years old, because you have to act like a parent and you have to act like an adult. And that is very, very, very hard to do when you're 22 and 23 and your friends who are working 9-to-5 jobs are going out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, having Sunday fun day. I mean, all of these things that they're living their 20s. And that was a very hard transition for me because I couldn't do that. Or I would second guess all those of like, no, I really shouldn't do that because I have to teach tomorrow and I have to be great for my kids. And so you really grow up very fast doing this. One other very quick funny story of irony is that when I first started at Clear Creek, there was a student there, probably the worst behaved student I have ever dealt with. The director, when had been there for 30 years, and the kids kind of took advantage of him a little bit, and this particular student just knew the ropes and knew when she could get away with things, and I came in and I was like, I'm not going to have that. And so her and I just fought and butted heads all year long. I tried everything in the book. I called every mentor and colleague. I said, what do I do? How do I get through this student? It just never worked. And so she graduated finally, praise Lord, and got out of the program. You know, but one night this past fall, I was walking my dog. I went to go get some froyo down the street, and I was walking down my hallway to my apartment. All of a sudden, I hear, "Hey, Mr. Meyer," and I'm like, "Hi, Sarah." And she's like, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I live here." And she goes, "So do I." She moved 3 doors down for me. Of all of the apartment complex, all throughout the city, she moves 3 doors down. And so I was terrified. I was like, oh God, I don't know what I'm going to do. But you know what? The flip side of that is that she really kind of came around and matured. And she has apologized multiple times. She goes, "I know I was your worst student. I know I gave you so much grief. And I'm really sorry. And I really respect you for what you're doing at that program now." And so it kind of like flipped. And it was crazy. So those things do happen, but the lesson in that I learned was that the kids grow up. And that no matter what you do, you have to be consistent, and you have to stick to what you know is best, and not let all of the teenage emotion and the drama get to you.
And the biggest thing that I learned, and this is kind of part of my clinic at TVA, is that, again, we have such high musical expectations, and the point for you being here and being in the careers that you're in, or the path to a career that you're in, is because you love this, and you love what we're doing, and nobody in the room with us, and when we're doing a rehearsal, is going to love it as much as we do. And so I had to shift very quickly to create an environment that didn't just reward the high-achieving students from a musical standpoint. I had to create an environment that rewarded any student that really put forth effort. Because I realized that at the beginning, I was kind of separating myself from the students who were at the bottom of the section, who were not behavioral problems, who were always there, who showed up to everything, who always had everything, got great grades. But suddenly I realized I wasn't rewarding them for that work they did. And I just realized very quickly that I would much rather any day of the week have a student in my band that is there working their butt off every day and who can't even put their mouthpiece on their horn, rather than somebody who could go to a conservatory who's a pain in the butt. And the moment I realized that, and the moment I said, these are the kids, regardless of how well they play, who are going to be able to go on from this life and represent what we've done well. And you know, that was hard for me. And so creating an environment where I rewarded effort, which for some students is, we're working on a B-flat scale for a pass-off and he gets to, and he can't do anything else. And that's about as far as we go. But the next day he gets 2 notes. Or the next time he gets 3 notes. And I may have somebody else who's playing all the scales, major, minor, arpeggios, everything, but who doesn't put forth nearly the same effort and passion in my classroom. And so when I was able to develop that kind of understanding, it really helped me. But the other thing that really helped me was the lesson I got from Randall Sprick, that anybody who argues with a 13-year-old is losing. Because there are so many things that I could say that I know from my mentors or from experience that I've had, even being only a few years older than them. But the point is, in that situation, when they're emotional and when there's other things going on in their life, they do not care what you think and what you have to say. And so the point of getting in a shouting match with someone who, as my psychiatrist uncle says, has a major section of the frontal lobe that doesn't work from age 12 to age 19, if you try and get in a philosophical or psychological argument with those students, it's a losing battle regardless of whether or not you are saying the right things. And then the other side to it is communicating with their parents. And we find that parents are very different from student to student, from place to place, and it really is a study in behavior. So I've kind of codified these groups of these types of parents, and you will be able to think immediately of someone in your program that is just like that. You have the rock star parents, which are the ones who show up to everything. They don't tell you how to teach, they don't tell you what marching band show to do, but they are there for everything. And they are so helpful, and you want to see if they can be a part of your family. You want to go eat Thanksgiving dinner with them, all this stuff. The next one is the ninjas, and these are a little bit scarier of parents because sometimes they just appear out of nowhere. It's 10 p.m. after, you know, on a Saturday after a contest or something, and you're trying to get work done, and they appear next to your desk. Do you need anything? And you're not prepared for that. But again, their goal is to work so hard, but sometimes you need a little space from the ninja crowd. And then the ones that always get to me are the don't you dare ask how they're doing parents, which means if you ask them, they will tell you, and you may as well pull up a chair, and it's going to take a while. And it's a similar situation that you may get information that you do not want to know about how their life is going at that time. Then it's starting to get scarier with the when I did band parents. You know those people who come in and say, well, back when I did band at this place and blah, 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 and then you're sitting there thinking, okay, I'm going to punch you. But, again, you have to think all the time that that type of parent is not doing it necessarily to be mean to you. That can be part of it. But the other part is that they're wanting something better for their kids. And so you have to have that positive light while gritting your teeth. And then the my child is God's gift to music parent, which you know those. The ones that show up and they can't understand how they got fourth chair, how dare they, whatever. And you have to explain to them the concept that other students can actually play their instruments as well. And then the final scary category is the Dr. Phil's, which they have no business being in your program. They should just go on an episode of Dr. Phil, and that's the only way we'll really get to the bottom of the issues that are happening. But the point is that all of those people are there. All of those parents are going to be in every single program. And again, what we have to think about is that they are going to be working and advocating for their child all the time. And that's kind of the next big thing, is that we have some parents who, when you communicate with them, we're talking about them as a student, but they are talking about them as their child, okay? So you recognize some of these parents that are maybe a little over-aggressive. That was the ugliest picture we could find, which again is not part of the view. But, so the student versus child thing is something we don't always consider. And that may be that they have a child who may be a huge behavior problem and who may be causing you all kinds of things. And so from a student standpoint, we're thinking, this child has to do something I wish your parents had never met, or I wish you had given up for adoption, or something to that level. But you can't say that to a parent. Strangely enough, they get angry at that. But the point being that they are always going to come in and advocate for their child. Okay? And there are plenty of parents who come in and say, I'm sorry, my kid is being a pain in the butt. I'll tell you a story that when I was in high school, my band director was sitting in, and he came out and he was angry that we were talking and something else was going on. And there was a drummer in the back who wasn't paying any attention. And he said, fine. And the band director walked off the podium. Of course, we're all silent then, staring at him. And the drummer, who hadn't been noticing anything, looked up, saw no one on the podium. So immediately stood up, and did, played something really loud on a marching snare drum. And my band director turned around and said, Mike, you're an asshole. And went into his office, and I was like, okay, this is it. Maybe I can do rehearsals tomorrow because the band director's going to be gone, and who's going to do marching band? I can do his dance sheets, can you do that? And so we had all these plans, and so my band director felt awful. He went up to the principal's office, told him immediately what happened, and then they said, well, we should call the dad in and tell him to come. So they called the parents in, the parents showed up, and my band director said, sir, I'm really sorry, but this is what happened. He explained. He said, I called your son an asshole. And the dad sat there and he said, he is an asshole. And so you're going to have those parents that will support you and back you up when they realize something like that is happening. But to be honest, I've had one or two of those moments, and most every other parent meeting I have is the assumption from the parent that I am attacking their child or I'm singling their child out for something. And that's just the way it is. And so when I can then develop that perspective that I'm trying to communicate ways to them that their child can be a better student, not trying to tell them how they can be a better child to them, sometimes we get a little easier chance trying to communicate with parents.
And it really is. They really can be your best friend or your worst nightmare. And what I was really shocked with when I first started was the parents that really had an issue, and the email, email is a great thing, but email, we're going to kind of talk about the double-edged sword of technology. And the fact that a parent could go and fire off an email that was so unprofessional and had so many lies in it based on what the emotional, dramatic teenager said, that they believe all of that is truth and go off of that. And they can write you the most hateful email
and send it to your board of education,
and copy it to the board of education and really just ruin your whole day. Because to respond to something like that, the easy thing to do is go, is to have the emotional reaction back. But I've learned to write that in a Microsoft Word document so it don't accidentally hit send. And then to craft a professional email that responds to all of their allegations and kind of defeats them takes for a long, long time to do. And I was really, we put so many hours and we put so much effort into this that it is our life. And when parents come and attack you, it is very hard. It was very hard for me to deal with that. And that's when, they really can be your best friends. Those rock star parents save our program. And that's why I said, if it really doesn't require a music education degree, try and get the parents to do that. That whole list of things that were in yellow at the first slide. There are parents, the rock star parents, that are willing to help you. In Clear Creek, it's right by NASA. So I have a lot of NASA parents and engineers in there that love to work on props. Like, I tell them, this is what we're going to do, this is what I think about the marching band show, and they, all of a sudden we have this model, and it's, in 3D form, and they love it. And so, and then you find the job that caters to them, and that relieves a lot of the pressure so you can focus on the musician and being the teacher. But again, it's really just about the communicating to the parents and the delivery of information that you give to them.
And with that, he already mentioned, my number one rule of communication is do not hit reply immediately. It's start in a Word document, start on a piece of paper, even less chance that can be copied and pasted over to an email. But start with something that doesn't involve responding emotionally. Because sometimes arguing with a 13-year-old is the same as arguing with a 13-year-old's parent who doesn't believe anything you say. Okay? And so understanding that that's kind of par for the course, when you have the moments where the parents are really understanding and really supportive, it's the greatest moment of your life because they're few and far between. The other part is you have to understand and be able to admit when you're wrong. And you have to be able to say, and I've made probably 3 phone calls this semester already since January to say, I'm sorry, I reacted really poorly to your child's behavior, and I said things that I shouldn't have said, or I called them out in front of the class in a way I shouldn't have done that. And if you start with that with a parent, not saying, well, here's what your crappy kid did, and now I'm kind of sorry about it. If I start with what I know I did wrong and what I know didn't make me a great teacher in that moment, a lot of times the parents are way calmer to be able to actually listen. Now, listening is the other part for you, is that you're not just waiting for your chance to share your side of the story. You are being both an active and a reflective listener. So you're able to listen to a parent who's sharing these concerns, and you're not just sharing your predetermined answer that you've had forever. You're taking the concerns that they just said, and you're addressing each one of them. And my first parent meeting, that didn't happen. I was in there like Judge Judy trying to make my point, and that's all that I was very standoffish, and I just put up a wall, and nothing resolved with that parent. And then my second meeting with that parent, I was much calmer, and I was able to actually have a conversation with the parent about what their concerns were and what my concerns were. Okay? And again, you're going to have adults who will not be mature enough to have a conversation with you.
And what they say in that situation is, well, I'm old enough to be your parent, and sometimes they treat you like that. So to get over that, you really have to not be the 23-year-old, not be the middle 20-something. You have to act like their age and be on the same page as them at that level of maturity, which is very hard to do. One of the other lessons in dealing with parents who could be your own or have children that are older than you is just make sure that you communicate your vision, communicate your excitement, and communicate your motivation for making music. And when I took over at Clear Creek, the director had been there for 30 years, a very well-established program. And I was not a fellow Texan. I had not taught in Texas, so no one really knew who I was. And I knew I had to prove myself, and I knew that all of those parents would go, well, who's this young hotshot that's coming in and going to take over this program? And I think one of the biggest things you can do is just be prepared and have a plan. And that first meeting with the next booster board, I had a packet about that thick of everything to a T that I wanted to accomplish in the following year, a long-term range plan, and this is what we're going to do for fundraising, this is the competitions I want to go to, this is my goal, and this is how we're going to do it. And they all just sat there pretty stunned of, wow, this guy kind of knows what he's doing. And so that helped alleviate a lot of that, whether, as opposed to you kind of being only one step ahead of the kids and figuring it out as you go. You really have to it's a lot of work, but the more prepared you can, the more of those parents turn into the rock star parents because they believe you and they trust you, and your excitement for making music and showing kids the small victories really becomes apparent, and those kids are excited and they go home and tell them about all the exciting things that are happening in the program.
Well, the other point is being ahead of the game with your parents and students on things like this mean you can handle all of these other things that we've talked about. You can handle these other little crises that come up in the middle of whatever you're trying to accomplish in a day. And so that's really the point that goes there. Now, the other group that is the important one to communicate with are our administrators. You can see Mr. Belding and then the Ferris Bueller principal. And I had a million different ways you could categorize administrators, but in most cases, it kind of breaks into two groups. It's the administrators that get what you do and support you, and it's the administrators that don't, or that are very wishy-washy about it. So you have to know what you're dealing with when you get there. I've been lucky with great principals who have done everything they could to just say, we support you, don't have a parent call. And they do what they can. But you have to have communication strategies in place for how you're going to communicate with an administrator in a situation where that becomes necessary. If something happens that a parent is going to be involved or something happens. The biggest part for us is that delivery is crucial. Most of the cases, like in Georgia, the only way to become a principal is to have 3 losing football seasons. And so for most people that are in that place, come on, that was fun. Most people who are in that place, you have to know that they are not going to understand or appreciate music the same ways that we do. Okay? Some of those principals are going to be the ones who think, man, I wish y'all would do that Beatles show again because that was real cool. And and we're thinking, and again, they loved it and they're so supportive, but they don't love it the same reason that we love it. And that's something you have to realize really quick. I can't walk in and start talking about the grand benefits of music and why I should do this type of thing, and a lot of times they're not going to care. They're going to be thinking about teams, they're going to be thinking about testing, and they're going to be thinking about how you can support that. And so as much as you can relate to that is going to be better. And they've developed, we keep cracking on the Koska-Payne and on Bloom's taxonomy, but there are ways that you can relate those things so well to what they're doing in all of their classrooms. There is a Bloom's taxonomy for musicians that you should look at, because anytime an administrator can see that and how you're integrating that concept into how you're teaching, and you don't, we think, oh, I don't want to write about that, but you're doing it every day. All you have to do is read the lines of each category and understand how that fits.
And when I used to get observed, when I first started teaching and I couldn't fire those words off at the top, I would put a list of them on my conductor stand of analyze, synthesize, evaluate, and as soon as an administrator walked in with their little PDA, I immediately started using those words, and the kids were like, huh? You're not this smart, Mr. Meyer. No. But all of a sudden, the assistant principal is going, oh, wow.
But the point is, it's not like it's so far detached from what you're doing.
No, it's not. It
is totally a part of what you're doing. It's just a syntax or a rhetoric approach to how you go about it. And if you know those things, and if you don't look at them like I looked at them when I was in the class, like this, if you look at them as something that can help you and can be relevant to your other classes, then you're going to be in a lot better shape to defend your program to an administrator that might be looking at dollar signs and not looking at how music benefits kids. Okay, and in this type of world, that's going to be something we have to always think about. Is they're not always looking at those benefits. They're looking at test scores and they're looking at dollar signs. The other thing is, don't forget to spread the good word. Anytime something great happens with your program, if and it can be the smallest thing, whether it doesn't have to be making honor band or making marching band or doing something really great. It's the small things that count, and the more positive that the principal or assistant principals get in their mailbox, the more likely they are to support you when anything inappropriate could come up or somebody has an issue. If you need to spread the positive all the time, and that's really hard to do, but make a conscious effort to do it. And I've been lucky that in those events I've had a lot of support because I do try and highlight the small victories. Well, and then being able to walk into a principal's office and say, I really screwed up, and I said something I shouldn't have said. I called a kid an a-hole, and even though his parents are going to agree eventually. But when you can prepare an administrator for something they may get from a parent, a call they may be getting or an email they may be getting, they're going to be in a lot better shape to be able to stand up for you. But if they don't know the facts, and again, facts are the important part, not necessarily your opinion. If they don't know the facts, then they're not going to have much of a chance to be able to defend you. And this comes up all the time with technology. You can't see this piggy back there, but
Hey, so what we want to talk about, I know this is probably what and more often now, we're starting to talk about technology and teachers and in music ed classes because it is so important. Technology is a double-edged sword. It's a great way to communicate with families and parents and deliver the information about what's going on, but it also can backfire on you very quickly. What we do is so great because we see kids over a long period of time. Whatever grades that you teach, if you're in elementary, middle, or high school, you see kids for an extended period of time. You develop a relationship with them that the math teacher or the science teacher doesn't have. And so with that comes, like we talked about earlier, a level of trust with those students, and sometimes they decide to cross the line and talk to you about what they did the past weekend. And that's immediately where I go, oh, get out of my office, go! You know, and you really have to establish, this is the line, you crossed it, don't ever do it again. And be very consistent with that, because you are young and the kids just spew, they want somebody to talk to. In the world we live in of Facebook and Twitter, everyone wants to know, or people think everyone wants to know exactly what they're thinking at every moment, especially teenagers. You know, you look on, I'm amazed, like, we have a Twitter account for the band program, and just some of, I read them a couple days ago, and some of the kids is like, I'm hungry. No one cares, you know? That's why I keep telling the kids, nobody cares. But we live in a world where it's easy just to say exactly what you're feeling and want people to respond to it. And that can really, we've seen it all the time with teachers. My first semester at Harrison, there was an incident with the orchestra teacher there. And everywhere that I've been, there have been multiple incidents where teachers just screw up. And they're text messaging, and you know, just don't do it. Don't put yourself in a situation where you can compromise your job and your future career. The one thing that I learned though, there's a lot of safeguards that you can use. At Harrison and what we do now, we always have a last man standing rule. If you go on a trip and the kids need a ride home, never put yourself in a situation where it's just you and a student. We always had a chaperone that was the last man standing and that would wait for us, because you don't know what's going on or what there is. Those rock star parents are willing to do that if you tell them, please don't leave me alone with a child. So doing all of that, having an administrator on the trip. When I first went to Clear Creek, we took a trip to Dallas, and so I knew that some of the kids were drinking. That's the key, like being a younger teacher. They thought they could get away with it. They probably had done it in the past, but having a young teacher, and then I immediately recognized it. And so I found it out. I found the substance on the bus, and we had to deal with that. But luckily, there was an administrator with us there, and the administrator took care of all of that. And that's the really great thing about trips, because when you take a trip with your group, it's most likely a performance trip, and you need those kids on your side. There's nothing worse than, you know, making a big scene and having this huge dramatic moment, and then the next day you have to go play a concert at the Meyerson Center. It's, you know, and you have to have the kids on your side. You're trying to make beautiful music with them after you've dealt with this dramatic incident, and the word has spread like fire over the band. So having an administrator on the trips or any extracurricular event is really great, just to make sure that, you know, they take care of all of the discipline issues.
And now, technology seems scary from that end, but there are also the millions of things that go on with technology that really make our lives easier, especially all of the yellow job titles that we have. And understanding how technology can support you in that. If you use charms, if you use any kind of organizational, yeah, I see the charm shirt, we're going to make you stand up here. But if you're using those things to help you along the way, it can really make again, your ability to handle those little crises when they come about so much easier, because you're prepared and because you're there. And it really affects how, especially how you understand what the calendar really means for everything that you're doing.
And the last thing with technology, it's really amazing now that kids have phones, that some kids created a Facebook page, and all of a sudden, like, our pictures appear on Facebook. The kids took a picture at a football game and posted it on Twitter and Facebook, and you're like, why is my picture on there? And you know, you just don't know what kids are doing or what they're snapping or what's going on, and so you really have to be careful with all of that and making sure that what's appropriate is getting out there and that you're monitoring all of that. Again, don't put yourself in a situation where you think it can be compromised. The next thing that we kind of want to talk about, this is something that Alfred Watkins at Lassiter High School taught me my very first year of teaching, is what the calendar means. And that your first year, you have no idea. You can look at a calendar, and like I said, you can be as prepared as you want, but understanding the calendar that first year makes all the difference the second year. Is that from now until UIL, I can kind of, okay, well, I have about 2 months until I play. No. We have testing for a week, we have spring break, and all of a sudden that 2 months crunches down to like 2 weeks. And that's really hard planning-wise and as a new teacher, because kids get called out of class for multiple things. Stuff that goes on that it throws you for a loop. You spend all that time preparing for a rehearsal, and half the kids show up because they're on an 8th grade field trip. You're like, what? You know, and so really trying to understand and get ahead of the schedule. Ask administrators, ask coaches, ask everybody in the school of what you think will affect your calendar and your rehearsals. Really is an important thing, and just it helps you just be prepared as possible and avoid that stress. In Eddie Green's book on teaching band, he says, do you ever get stressed in rehearsals? I said no. He says no, because he knows what he's doing now. And I kind of related to that. When I was very young, I would get stressed in rehearsals, and that really affected my teaching style, and it makes sense. I just didn't know what I was doing. I was stressed because of multiple different factors. But now that I know what's going on, I'm more prepared, I'm more relaxed with the students, and it really helps the whole teaching style and creating the music that we want to create with them.
And just briefly, the other thing for you to constantly evaluate in your situation is what I kind of call the small band, big band issue. In a lot of cases, you have teachers who are at a school with, maybe you have 30 winds, maybe you have 2 percussionists, and you try to do things, you try and legitimize what you're teaching and what marching band show you're doing, or what literature you're playing in concert band based on what a program that may have 300 kids in it is doing. And so you're trying to accomplish something with a small band that may not really be possible. And if you can be realistic with yourself about, okay, I have 12 kids in this concert band, I can't do the G&E symphony or something. And if you can look at that and say, what can I do that's going to give them the best chance to succeed? And figuring out what they can really handle as that type of group, it's going to be way less stressful for you and way more successful for them to be able to do something that's a realistic goal. And that's hard sometimes, because you go in knowing what you want to accomplish, knowing what your favorite wind literature is, and knowing how it all fits, but it may not fit your program. And you may be creating an environment where A, you're stressed out because you can't get it to the place you want to. B, your kids hate it because they feel defeated the entire time because they can't find any sense of progress or any sense of development. And so if you're really realistic with yourself about how that fits, you're going to have a much better chance of making students motivated to be a part of what you're doing.
And that's one thing that Gary Markham, who was my boss in Georgia, he said, Steve, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And that really has stuck with me of, this is a marathon of what we're doing. It's a long-term process. Whether or not whatever my goals are, it will take a long time to get there. And you really have to focus on the small victories, and to know, I keep telling myself, Rome wasn't built in a day, Rome wasn't built in a day. And it really has helped me get through all of that while still making me excited for all the little victories that we had. And those victories really help the burnout. We know that teachers in the first 5 years, if they can survive the first 5 years, there's less likelihood that they get burned out. I think Mr. Benzer and a couple of the U of H grads are doing a clinic on that. So please go to that, because that's a big issue, is the burnout. And all I can really say is that you need to find a musical outlet. If you're not getting the musical fulfillment from your job yet, you need to find other ways to keep doing that. I play in the Galveston Symphony and teach I used to teach some lessons when I was in Georgia. I used to do the Georgia Youth Symphony Orchestra. Other different musical outlets that I was getting to have that musical fulfillment that then I could take back to my program and watch it build. And then there's really nothing better than going to the gym after a stressful rehearsal and punching a punching bag, or going running. So I really encourage, keep doing that, and keep your motivation going for what you're doing, and it will get better. It does get better. The last thing we can talk about is what to do now. Obviously, all of you that are here are attending clinics and trying to get better, and that really is the best thing to do. The thing that I learned when I first started teaching is to lose your ego. Do not have an ego at all. The other thing is, you may not have an ego, but for some veteran directors maybe that you teach with, your excitement and your excitement to go out and to keep doing things and to volunteer for things and to step up because you're really excited about what you do can come across as, who is this guy, who is this hotshot that's trying to take over that knows nothing? And as a young teacher, I felt that a lot. And so I kind of had to back away a little bit and kind of just sneak into the crowd. And it was not that I had an ego at all. I just really kind of wanted to be a part of it and do what I could to help volunteer. But you just be mindful of that when you're doing it and how you're coming across to your peers. But make sure those peers are on your side. Ask questions. Find the people that you respect most and ask them questions about anything. And those mentors will help guide you through your program.
And the other part is, when we think about who we want to go observe, we think about, oh, let's go observe a great program, let's go observe something. But you need to find programs on all ends of the spectrum that you observe. Not just so you learn what you should do and what can happen, but observe people in a similar situation to you. and see what they're doing that either works or that doesn't work. Figure out what you can take from that and either go, I will never ever do that, or man, I wish I had thought of that earlier. And if you're constantly only looking, and it kind of relates to the big band, small band issue, if you're only looking at the programs that are nothing like yours, that are achieving at a different level just because of their situation, I don't know how much of that you can really take back to your own program. So be realistic about what you use as your motivation, as your example.
And the last thing, Mr. Kramer, who was at Indiana University for a long time, just the one thing I got from him was to never stop learning. And people say that all the time, and that is so true. Never stop growing, and never stop trying to achieve more with your students, because if you have them under your hook, you'll be able to do anything with them. It just takes time. The last kind of thing is we know we kind of have talked about a lot of the different things, and we're so grateful that you guys are here. It's very hard, and everyone says only 10% of your job is actually teaching music, which is kind of true on a normal day. But you know what, when a kid comes back, that girl who came into my office and broke down about her parents, when she graduates and writes you a letter and says that it was because of band that she was able to work through all those problems, she had an outlet for her, and she thanks for all the musical training and who she's become because of band, it makes it all worth it. And that is what you really have to hang on to. Those moments are far and few between, but when they do happen, it makes it all worth it. All of this junk and all of the non-musical things that we talk about, very much worth it.
I think because it's 900 degrees in here, if you have a question or a comment you want to make with us, you can come up and talk to us there. So if you're needing to get on to the next place. Thank you
guys so much for coming.